Welcome back. Today we have a 2005 Jeep Liberty, who was towed in as a no start. I know what you're thinking, but let me stop you right there. The owner was doing a tune-up, following some misfire codes, and decided to change the crank sensor on the advice of the fine folks at an auto parts store in their scan tool, and snapped the crank sensor off in the block. So, I know these things have a really bad reputation, but let me show you something about this one. So 224,797 miles, and it's remarkably original. I know the owner, I know that he takes care of his things, but this has certainly not been babied. It started out life as his mother-in-law's vehicle, and she's actually the one who put most of the miles on it. And now he has a long drive to work, and he's taken it over and is riding out the rest of its life here as it succumbs to Michigan rust. So I know that these 3.7s, they seem to be hit or miss, but I've seen a lot of these with this kind of miles, and it leads me to believe that maybe some of the bad rap that they have is not all that entirely deserved. Not that people haven't had terrible experiences with them, but these are just a little bit tougher than their general reputation would lead you to believe. So let's get it in the shop and get it up in the air and see what we're working with. Alrighty, so we are in the shop and on the lift, and that right there is what's left. Let's see if we can zoom in a little bit on that guy for you. Right there is what's left of the crank position sensor. So if I take a look at my new part, which is right over here in the box, this came with the Jeep. You can see that there's probably still a pretty good bit of, don't look at my messy shop. There's still a pretty good bit of sensor in there, and our culprit is probably this rubber O-ring. Over years and miles and heat cycles, those things will turn rock hard, and then they don't just slide out. You have to start using violence. And there's one thing that old brittle plastic does not like, and that's violence. And you wind up with exactly what we're looking at here. So I'm going to go get changed and soak this thing down with some penetrating oil first, just to help loosen up any rust that may have creeped its way into that bore and started squeezing on that sensor. And then we'll start escalating different violent tactics until we have the sensor out and can screw the new one in. Alright, so here's attempt number 1. We'll try to use as little violence as possible and escalate until we successfully remove what's left of this sensor. But attempt number 1 is soaking the thing in PB Blaster while I went in the house and changed into my work clothes. And now I've driven a screw as deep into it as it would go before the screw seemed like it wanted to snap. And what I'm going to do is just get a pair of 90-degree pliers on it and see if I can pry the thing out of the block. We may go ahead, my light just died. We may go ahead and heat that a little bit first just to see if we can restore some flexibility to that rubber and maybe get the plastic a little bit melty. We don't want it melting and running all over the bore or dripping down into the engine, but if we can soften it a little, that may help. So let's get cracking. Alright, I don't want to try getting it too hot, so we'll start there. Let's see if we can get the screw in any further now that it's warm. A little bit. Alright, so the idea is we'll get these pliers and kind of leverage against the block here and just see what happens when we give it a pull. Oh, okay. Learn that leverage against the black there, I guess. Okay. How about here? Alright, well the sensor's starting to crack. I'm going to see if I can drive the screw in a little bit further. Oh, come on. My magnetic bit picked up some junk there. Well, that is tight. Alright, let's see if I can get any better than this. Oh, that sucker's in there. Alright, I'm gonna see about some additional violence. Alright, I had to put you in the tripod because I'm gonna need both hands. I'm sorry if I block the camera with any of this, but I'm thinking if I get a pry bar here to leverage against the pliers, and we're still just slipping. Those trans lines are right in the way. Yeah, how about that? Nope. Okay. Let's try some different pliers. Alright, I'm going to try and lock a pair of vice grips on the thing and then come under it with the pry bar. Let's see what that does. This may look like it's fighting me, and it is, but the reality is that you can actually see and reach what you're doing here at the same time. Do this same job with this same busted sensor on like a GM 60 degree V6, like a 3.1 or a 2.8 from the 90s, and this would be a gift from the gods, being able to get to this like this. So, not complaining. And yeah, it's got some fight in it, but at least it's not an oil return line on a Turbo Cummins. 5.9 to 6.7, where that line pushes into the block. Oh, I have lifted trucks off the ground trying to get enough pressure on that line to get it to come out. So, this ain't no big deal. We'll get this figured out. I think I'm getting close to breaking the screw. No movement yet. Let's try and heat it back up a little bit. Well, you can't get much hotter than being on fire. Well, I'd have been okay with that if it was the sensor coming out, but it was just the screw pulling out and my light falling and smacking the floor. Alright, so I wound up having to drive a second screw into it and using a little more heat, but you can see that that sensor, or at least the metal on the inside, is starting to come out of the block. And that's okay, because once that comes out, we've relieved the pressure, and then I can easily get the plastic and rubber bits out. So, just takes persistence and violence, and again, just thankful that you can actually see what you're doing working on these. Well, let's keep going. Oh, I also switched to a bigger pry bar. It's kind of one of the key elements of increasing the violence aspect of it. Get this light back where it belongs. Alright. There's that. Now we're left with a plastic lined hole in the block. Let's see what we can do to get that out of there. I have some ideas. Alright, so what I don't want to do is knock any of that plastic into the internals of the block. So what I have here is an internal bearing puller tool, where this first bit here is going to fit into the plastic part of the sensor, and then this screws into it to expand it so that we get a tight fit. Now you're supposed to use it with a little slide hammer. I'm not going to have room for that. I think if I can just get it on there and pry on it a little, that should help get that out without anything falling inside the engine. So I'll get that set up and we'll be right back. So here's the idea. Right, that's threaded in, and that adapter takes up the center space in that plastic sleeve. And then I've got a little gap between the adapter and the tool where I can get the end of the pry bar. Again, not the right way to use it. You're supposed to put a slide hammer in the end of it, but I just don't have room with the way that the engine's situated in here. So let's give this a whack and see what happens. There it is. That worked. Took a little more violence than I hoped, but it is out. So there's the hole in the block. That's a little rusty around the bore. I am going to clean that up, but I need a fine balance between getting that cleaned up and knocking debris into the oil pan that will then get sucked up into the engine. So as long as the new sensor slides in, I'm not going to worry about it too much. But that's about the job. I'm going to get the bore cleaned and the new sensor installed, and I need to find a bolt because that is apparently missing in action, and we'll see if it cranks. Oh, that's the job done. Kind of hard to see with the connector plugged in, but sensor is seated in the block, it's bolted in, connector's back where it goes. Shove this thing down and see if it fires up. Alright, moment of truth. We're back in business. My next step here will be to check this code, see why the check engine light's on. Also noticing some pretty good stumbling while this thing is idling. It may not be picked up too well on camera, but it definitely feels like it's got a little bit of a miss. So I'll get in touch with the guy who owns it and see if he wants me to do some diagnostic there. That was probably pretty noticeable. See if he wants me to do some diagnostics and see if we can figure out a deeper problem or if it's good enough as it is. So the Liberty is going home. The owner did ask me to look into that intermittent stumble once I got it running with the new crank sensor, and I think it's actually coming from the new crank sensor. I went through and through the vehicle, checked all the wiring, really nothing definitive coming through the scanner data, but it's acting exactly like it is occasionally missing the crank signal. And the data that I get from the scanner, I don't have a specific PID to watch the crank signal itself. There's only an is it in sync, and it blips so quickly that I'm just not catching anything. But you know, the TPS is good, the cam sensor's good, the map sensor's good. All the tune-up parts on this thing are actually new. It's got the right plugs in it. It's literally nothing that I've done to it has gotten me any closer to understanding. It does have an O2 sensor code. I thought, hey, maybe there's something going on here. I disconnected the wiring to all the O2 sensors and just let it run that way, and it still occasionally will stumble. But here's where we're at. Right, this is an older vehicle. It may even be heading into its last winter just due to the amount of rust on the unibody. So it runs, it drives, it occasionally misses, but this thing is making a 3 or 4 mile drive back and forth to work every day, and it's just not worth it to the owner of the vehicle to put to replace a sensor that he just replaced just to see if that sensor's bad. If it was stalling out and not restarting or giving some indication that it wasn't going to get him back and forth to work through the snow and the salt this winter, that might be a different story. But for what it is, for how it's used, that's honestly just going to be a wrap on this one. So thanks again for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. I'm really trying hard to get this channel off the ground, and your support means everything. Thank you.